In 1834, on an isolated plantation deep in the Mississippi Delta, a pair of twin girls were born into slavery with eyes that defied explanation. Plantation records mention them only once, in a single cryptic entry that was later scratched out and replaced with empty lines. The twins disappeared from all official documentation within months of their birth, but oral histories passed down through generations speak of their haunting gaze, eyes that seem to hold knowledge no infant should possess. The absence of any record of their existence left deep scars in the community's memory, marking generations with a silent trauma that only now, nearly 2 centuries later, begins to surface in forgotten archives and whispered testimonies. Before we continue, subscribe and hit the bell icon. Here we unearth secrets buried by official history and give voice to what was silenced. Chapter 1. The photograph that should not exist. The daguerreotype discovered in 2023 at an estate sale in Natchez, Mississippi, should not exist. Photography was in its infancy in 1834 and enslaved people were almost never photographed. Yet there they are, 2 identical girls, perhaps 3 or 4 years old, standing barefoot in matching rough-spun dresses. Their faces are solemn, their posture unnaturally still for children so young. But it is their eyes that stop every viewer cold. In the silvered image, their eyes appear to reflect light in a way that defies the limitations of early photography. They seem to glow from within, luminous and penetrating, as if capturing something beyond the physical world. The photograph came with no provenance, no names, no dates, only a handwritten note on the back in faded ink. The Morrison twins. May God forgive what we have done. The Morrison Plantation, according to county records, existed along the Yazoo River from 1821 until it burned to the ground in 1859. The family claimed total loss in the fire, including all plantation records, slave inventories, and personal correspondence. Convenient destruction, some historians now suggest, for a family desperate to hide something monstrous. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a specialist in antebellum photography at Tulane University, examined the daguerreotype in 2024. Her conclusion shook the academic community. The image is authentic, dating to approximately 1834 or 1835, making it one of the earliest known photographs of enslaved children in America. But Vasquez could not explain the luminosity in the twins' eyes. Digital enhancement revealed no manipulation, no double exposure, no photographic trick. The eyes simply reflect light in a manner inconsistent with normal human physiology or the technology of the era. Local historians in Warren County began investigating. They found scattered references in adjacent plantations' records, brief mentions of the Morrison anomaly, of strange offspring, of midnight visits by physicians from New Orleans who arrived with unusual equipment and departed in haste. One letter, discovered in the attic of a former overseer's descendant, speaks of unnatural experiments and warns against pursuing Morrison's obsession with perfecting the bloodline. The letter is dated March 1835, just months after the twins would have been born. The Morrison family patriarch, Colonel Thaddeus Morrison, was educated at Edinburgh and had studied under physicians interested in phrenology and hereditary traits. His personal library, partially preserved through items sold before the fire, included texts on selective breeding, anatomical studies, and speculative works on human enhancement through controlled reproduction. One volume, recovered from a private collector in 2022, contained handwritten margins filled with calculations, genetic theories decades ahead of their time, and sketches of eye structures with notes about inherited luminescence and evidence of successful intervention. What experiment did Morrison conduct? What did he do to create children whose eyes defied natural explanation? And why, after their birth, did every official record of their existence vanish as if erased by deliberate hands? The photograph offers no answers, only the haunting gaze of 2 little girls who should not have been photographed, whose eyes should not glow in the silvered image, whose very existence was meant to be forgotten by history. Chapter 2. The Physician's Ledger. The first concrete evidence emerged in 2019, when renovations of an antebellum mansion in Vicksburg uncovered a hidden compartment beneath floorboards in what had been a physician's office. Inside, a leather-bound ledger belonging to Dr. Nathaniel Crane, a New Orleans physician who made frequent trips to Mississippi plantations between 1830 and 1840. His entries are clinical, detached, documenting medical procedures with scientific precision, but scattered throughout are passages that read like confessions, moments where professional distance collapses into horror at his own complicity. The entry dated November 12, 1834, describes Morrison Plantation in detail. Crane arrived to oversee what he calls the culmination of Colonel Morrison's breeding initiative. He documents the birth of twin girls to a woman named Delilah, age 17, selected 3 years prior for what Morrison termed ideal genetic characteristics. The birth was unremarkable, Crane notes, both infants healthy and identical in every measurable way. But within hours something changed. The eyes, Crane wrote, his handwriting becoming erratic, exhibit a phenomenon I cannot explain through any medical knowledge I possess. In normal light, they appear as any infant's eyes. But in dim light, particularly candlelight, they reflect luminescence unlike anything in nature. Morrison is triumphant, calling it proof of his theories. He believes selective pairing combined with specific prenatal treatments has produced something unprecedented. I fear what I have helped create. The prenatal treatments Crane references appear in earlier entries. Throughout Delilah's pregnancy, Morrison administered compounds he developed himself, mixtures containing silver nitrate, phosphorus derivatives, and extracts from deep-sea organisms known for bioluminescence. The dosages, Crane notes with increasing alarm, exceeded any safe medical practice. Morrison dismissed concerns, insisting he was elevating the bloodline beyond human limitation, creating offspring who would carry visible proof of scientific superiority. But Morrison's true purpose becomes clear in Crane's later entries. The colonel wanted more than scientific achievement. He planned to breed an entire generation of enslaved workers whose unusual eyes would mark them as his exclusive property, impossible to escape without immediate identification. A living patent, branded not with irons, but with genetics, children whose very biology would advertise their owner's dominance and scientific genius. Crane's entries grow darker. He documents other pregnancies on Morrison Plantation, other women subjected to Morrison's compounds. Most pregnancies ended in miscarriage or stillbirth. The twins, he writes, were Morrison's first success after 7 failures. The 7 previous women were never mentioned in plantation records again. Crane speculates they were sold to distant plantations or worse, disappeared to hide evidence of failed experiments. By January 1835, Crane's horror had crystallized into action. His final entry regarding Morrison Plantation is dated January 28th. I have informed Morrison I will no longer participate in his work. He received my refusal with cold fury, warning that my silence is purchased with the fees he has paid me. I have accepted his devil's bargain. God help me, I have taken his blood money and walked away from those children, from Delilah, from all of them. I am complicit in something monstrous, and I lack the courage to expose it. Crane never returned to Morrison Plantation. His ledger continues with routine medical cases, but the entries are mechanical, stripped of the professional pride evident in earlier pages. He died in 1842, having never spoken publicly about Morrison's experiments. His silence, purchased for profit, ensured the twins' story remained buried for nearly 2 centuries. Chapter 3. The Mother's Testimony. Delilah's voice comes to us through the most unlikely source. A memoir written in 1889 by Reverend Isaiah Crawford, a formerly enslaved man who learned to read and write after emancipation. Crawford had been a child on Morrison Plantation, too young to understand the full horror of what transpired, but old enough to remember. In his memoir, privately published and preserved in only 3 known copies, he dedicates an entire chapter to Delilah and her daughters. Crawford describes Delilah as Morrison's prized selection, chosen at age 14 from newly purchased enslaved people, specifically for Morrison's breeding experiments. She was literate, having been taught secretly by a previous owner's daughter. She was strong, intelligent, and, Crawford writes with profound sadness, had no say in any of it. Morrison paired her with a man named Tobias, also selected for specific traits: height, physical strength, and curiously, what Morrison termed visual acuity superior to the common. The pregnancies before the twins had devastated Delilah. Crawford recalls hearing her grief through the cabin walls, the sound of a young woman mourning losses she could not speak about openly. When the twins were born and survived, Crawford remembers brief joy in the quarters, celebration that Delilah had finally delivered healthy babies. But the celebration died quickly when people saw the twins' eyes. By candlelight, Crawford wrote, their eyes shone like animal eyes caught in firelight, but brighter, stranger. The glow was silver blue, cold as winter moonlight. People said they could see those eyes in the dark cabin, watching. It frightened even the bravest among us. Delilah loved her babies fiercely, but I remember her crying that they had been marked, that they would never be safe, that Morrison had made them into something that could never hide, never escape, never be free. Morrison kept the twins in his main house for the first months, Crawford recalls, showing them to visitors like exotic trophies. Delilah was forced to nurse them there, under Morrison's observation while he recorded observations and measurements. She was forbidden to speak about the prenatal treatments, threatened with separation from her daughters if she revealed anything about Morrison's methods. But Delilah did speak, quietly, carefully, to a few trusted people in the quarters. Crawford heard the stories years later from his grandmother, who had been Delilah's closest confidant. The compounds Morrison administered during pregnancy had burned like fire in her veins, Delilah confided. They made her violently ill, gave her visions and nightmares, left her weak and trembling. She begged Morrison to stop, but he insisted the treatments were essential. He told her she was carrying the future, Crawford's grandmother had said. He told her she should be proud to birth his scientific triumph. Proud, as if she had any choice. Now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this story. I want to know how far these silenced accounts reach. Chapter 4. The Disappearance. The twins vanished from Morrison Plantation in March 1835, when they were approximately 4 months old. No sale records exist, no transfer documents, no death certificates. One day they were there, displayed in Morrison's house like curiosities in a cabinet, and the next they were gone. Delilah remained on the plantation, but Crawford remembers her as transformed, silent, hollow-eyed, moving through her work like a ghost. She never spoke of her daughters again, at least not where children could hear. But others spoke, in whispers that Crawford only understood years later. People in the quarters believed Morrison had sold the twins secretly, sending them far away where their unusual appearance might be marketable to wealthy collectors of human oddities. Others thought Morrison had killed them when the novelty wore off, when he realized their glowing eyes made them impossible to hide, impossible to profit from in conventional ways. A few believed something darker, that Morrison had continued his experiments, that the twins had not survived whatever procedures he attempted next. Contemporary records from neighboring plantations offer fragments of truth. A letter written by Martha Henley, mistress of neighboring Henley Oaks Plantation, mentions in April 1835 that Colonel Morrison's peculiar infants have been removed, though he will not say where or why. His wife appears much relieved by their absence, which suggests they caused disturbance in the household. Another letter from a factor in New Orleans acknowledges receipt of payment for special transport requiring discretion, dated March 15, 1835, with Morrison as the client. The most disturbing evidence comes from port records in New Orleans. A ship named Providence sailed for Liverpool on March 20, 1835, carrying among its passengers a Mr. Edmund Thorne, traveling with 2 infant wards. The passenger list notes no further details, but maritime records indicate Thorne was a known procurer of human curiosities for European exhibitions and medical institutions. Whether the infants were Morrison's twins cannot be proven definitively, but the timing is exact, the discretion suggestive. If Morrison did sell his daughters to European exhibitions, it would explain the complete absence of domestic records. Such sales existed in a legal gray area, not quite slavery, not quite legitimate medical research, but rather human trafficking disguised as scientific inquiry. Enslaved people with unusual characteristics were sometimes purchased specifically for exhibition in Europe, where laws differed and public fascination with human oddities created a profitable market. Delilah lived until 1847, dying at age 30. Crawford remembers her funeral, small and quiet, attended by those who had known her in the quarters. She was buried in the unmarked slave cemetery behind Morrison Plantation, her grave distinguished only by a wooden cross that has long since rotted away. Crawford's memoir includes one final detail about Delilah. In her last days, feverish and dying, she spoke of her daughters, calling their names, Seraph and Eden. Names Crawford had never heard before, names that appear nowhere in plantation records. Seraph and Eden Morrison. Not property to be inventoried, but daughters who were named, who were loved, whose mother carried their memory in silence for 12 years until death finally released her from the burden of unspeakable loss. Names that survive only because Crawford remembered them, wrote them down, insisted they be part of the historical record, even when official history tried to erase them completely. Chapter 5. The European Trail. The trail goes cold in Liverpool, but not completely. British medical journals from 1836 contain references to remarkable juvenile specimens of African descent, examined by physicians at the Royal College of Surgeons. The descriptions are clinical, dehumanizing, treating the subjects as objects of scientific curiosity rather than children. But certain details align: identical female twins, approximately 18 months old, exhibiting ocular luminescence of unexplained origin. Dr. Thomas Wakefield, a prominent anatomist, published a brief paper in 1837 titled Observations on Unusual Ocular Reflection in Twin Specimens. The paper describes examining two girls whose eyes reflected light in a manner reminiscent of certain nocturnal creatures yet absent any apparent anatomical structure to explain the phenomenon. Wakefield theorized nutritional deficiency or exotic disease, never considering deliberate intervention. His paper includes sketches, careful anatomical drawings of eye structures that, even in black and white, convey something unsettling about the subject's gaze. But Wakefield's notes also contain something unexpected. Compassion, buried in clinical language, are observations suggesting he recognized the twins' humanity. He notes they responded to gentle speech with apparent understanding, that they exhibited distress when separated, that they sought comfort from each other. He observed that they appeared remarkably intelligent for their age, that their eyes, despite their unusual quality, tracked movement and focused on faces with keen interest. These observations so troubled Wakefield that he lobbied for the twins' release from medical exhibition. His personal correspondence, preserved at the Royal College, reveals a man wrestling with conscience. In a letter to a colleague dated August 1837, Wakefield writes, "I can no longer in good conscience treat these children as specimens. They are human. They suffer. They understand their confinement. Whatever phenomenon their eyes present, it does not justify their continued imprisonment for our curiosity." Wakefield succeeded. In September 1837, the twins were released from medical custody and placed with a charitable institution run by a Quaker organization dedicated to educating children regardless of race or origin. Records from this institution, the Hadwell Foundation for Displaced Children, survived until the building's destruction during World War II, but copies of some documents exist in Quaker archives in Philadelphia. These records identify the twins by the names Seraph and Eden, confirming they were indeed Morrison's daughters. The Hadwell Foundation's notes describe their adjustment: initial fear and mistrust, gradual willingness to engage with caregivers, eventual thriving in an educational environment. A teacher named Margaret Bosworth kept a diary mentioning them repeatedly, marveling at their quick learning, their inseparable bond, their eyes that still caught light in the most curious way, though it seemed to fade somewhat as they grew older. The Foundation's records end in 1845, when the twins would have been 11 years old. A notation indicates they were placed with a Quaker family in Lancashire, for continued education and eventual apprenticeship. The family is not named, likely to protect their privacy and the twins' safety from those who might seek to exploit them again. This protective anonymity, while frustrating for historians, suggests the twins finally found people who valued their well-being over their marketability. Chapter 6. The Legacy in Light. The twins' story might have ended in Lancashire obscurity, lost to time like so many histories of enslaved people, if not for a remarkable discovery in 2024. A historian researching Quaker involvement in abolitionism found a collection of letters written between 1848 and 1870 by a woman identified only as E.M. Cross-referencing handwriting samples and biographical details revealed E.M. was almost certainly Eden Morrison, one of the twins. The letters, addressed to various correspondents in the abolitionist movement, are written in precise, educated English. Eden became a teacher, working at a school for children of formerly enslaved Americans who emigrated to Britain after emancipation. Her letters discuss pedagogy, philosophy, and the ongoing struggle for racial justice. They are remarkable documents, the voice of someone who survived scientific exploitation to become an educator herself, transforming her own trauma into advocacy for others. But it is in a letter dated November 1869 that Eden finally addresses her own history. Writing to Frederick Douglass during his tour of Britain, she reveals her identity. I am one of two. Born in Mississippi to a mother whose name was Delilah, subjected in infancy to experiments I can barely fathom, displayed as a curiosity, and through God's grace delivered to safety by those who saw humanity where others saw only specimen. She writes about her eyes, the source of so much anguish. The peculiar quality that caused our suffering has diminished with age. We no longer glow in the dark like strange lanterns, but sometimes in certain light I catch that gleam in the mirror and remember what we survived. My sister and I made a pact years ago. We would not hide, would not be ashamed of what was done to us before we could speak or choose. We carry this mark as testimony to what slavery made possible, what human beings will do to each other when one is property and the other owner. Eden's letter to Douglass never mentions Seraph directly in the present tense, always using we and our when discussing their shared history, but shifting to singular pronouns when discussing her current work. Historians believe Seraph may have died before 1869, though no death record has been found. The twins' story diverges at some point in adulthood, leaving Eden to carry forward alone the memory they shared. Eden Morrison lived until at least 1870. Her letters end there, and no further trace of her exists in British records. She would have been 36 years old, having survived slavery, scientific exploitation, medical exhibition, transatlantic displacement, and the profound trauma of being created as an experiment. She survived to write, to teach, to correspond with Frederick Douglass, to testify in her own words about what was done to her and her mother and her sister. If this story has gripped you, leave a like. It helps Eden and Delilah's story reach more people. The daguerreotype found in Natchez sits now in the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, in a section dedicated to scientific racism and medical exploitation during slavery. Visitors stop before it, struck by those luminous eyes staring back across nearly 2 centuries. The museum label tells what is known: names, approximate dates, the story of Morrison's experiments, Eden's letters proving survival. But the label cannot convey the full weight of what the photograph represents. 2 little girls who should not have been photographed, eyes that should not have glowed, lives that should not have been experiments, a mother who loved daughters she was powerless to protect, a silence that lasted almost 200 years before voices like Eden's broke through to insist on truth. Subscribe to this channel to discover more forbidden and forgotten stories. Thank you for following the case of Seraph and Eden Morrison. See you in the next video. The light in their eyes, deliberately created through prenatal intervention, documented with scientific detachment, exhibited for profit, has become something different now. A warning light, perhaps. A reminder that behind every scientific breakthrough involving enslaved people lay humans who suffered, mothers who grieved, children who carried marks not of their choosing. The twins' luminous gaze captured in that impossible photograph looks out at us not as curiosity but as testimony. Look at what was done to us, those eyes say. Remember, bear witness. Do not let this be forgotten again.